What's up, everybody? Nate here. So the housing market in the United States has taken a pretty crazy turn over the last 2 years. We've seen interest rates go all the way down to 0% just to rise now again in 2022. At the same time, we've seen prices pretty stable and then skyrocket over the last 2 years. This has led a lot of people and experts to wonder if the housing market is in a bubble and if that bubble is about to burst. But there are some other really crazy things going on in the housing market right now. We are starting to see a massive migration of people from suburbs back to the cities, and we're also starting to see home affordability hit rock bottom. So today I want to give an update on the housing market. I want to talk about everything that's happening right now, if there truly is a bubble in the housing market, and if it's going to pop. But before I get into all of that, do me a quick favor and hit, smash, or destroy that thumbs up button below and ring that notification bell too. Both of those two things are completely free and they help to show me that you like this video and that you want to see even more just like it. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about in regards to the housing market is home affordability. Obviously, over the last 2 years, this has been a major concern for buyers and for two major reasons. For one, the Federal Reserve had its benchmark interest rates at 0%, but now it's starting to raise them. The Fed wants to eliminate a lot of the demand out of our economy, and in order to do that, they have to start raising rates. But this is pricing a good portion of people out of the housing market in general. In 2020, Americans could save hundreds of dollars on their mortgage because interest rates were super low. Now, though, they're going to spend an additional $100 or more on their mortgage simply because interest rates have crossed over 5%, the highest we've seen in many years. So interest rates are going up, which is bringing demand down in the housing market, but we're still starting to see housing prices go up. The reason for that is because many Americans are being pushed to buy homes right now by banks and financial institutions. If you want to buy a home, banks say, well, this is the price you pay for it, even though housing prices are way too unaffordable for most people. However, that doesn't really matter for a lot of Americans. They have that fear of missing out. If they don't get a home right now, then they're never going to be able to afford one in the future because home prices have consistently gone up over the last 20 and 30 years, and interest rates are now getting higher than they ever have before. This has meant that housing affordability has hit rock bottom. Many Americans simply can't afford a home right now, and that has become a major issue. This is all leading to demand in the housing market slowly going down. We're starting to see sales go down. In fact, sales in the United States for homes have gone down for the past 4 months, so Americans are buying a lot less homes. To be clear though, demand is still very much through the roof, way more elevated than we're used to seeing. Now, with that being said, let's talk about the other side of the coin here, inventory. As many Americans have bought homes, this has meant that home inventory has slowly dwindled, and in 2022, inventory has become a problem that has only pushed housing prices up even further. Over the last 2 years, it made a lot of sense for homeowners to put their house on the market. They were going to get a huge bang for their buck because the housing market was so hot. But in 2022, it doesn't make a lot of sense for current homeowners to now sell their home. Because buyer demand has slowly started to drop in the United States, this has meant that home prices have slightly cooled off across the board. Now, obviously, this is going to vary from market to market. Not every single home market is going to be showing massive price losses. In fact, there are some markets that are hotter than ever. But it all comes down to where demand is right now. If you live in an area that is highly in demand, then housing prices are still going to be very hot. However, this isn't true for every area, and across the board, we're starting to see a slow decrease in housing prices. This is to be expected as fewer and fewer people are able to buy homes. Ultimately, that gives some time for home inventory to increase, but homeowners are not selling just yet. For one, homeowners have a lot of equity in their house. This is the difference between what they owe on their mortgage and what they've already paid off. That means that because they have so much equity in their homes, they own more of their homes than they ever have in American history. In addition, a lot of Americans don't have a huge housing payment right now, so they don't want to sell their house and then have to pay even more. This isn't a foolproof plan though, because many Americans who bought houses are still able to afford them at this point, but that's not going to continue in the future because of inflation and because of taxes. Taxes and property taxes rise in the United States and will go up in your area as other homes in your subdivisions start to cost a lot more money. As their values increase, property taxes will most likely go up too. So you now have to pay more just for living in your house, and property taxes are going up for some Americans hundreds of dollars every single year. Many Americans aren't going to be able to afford that, so even though they initially were able to afford their home, now that house is getting a lot more expensive, which is going to push some Americans to put their house on the market, but only if it makes sense. Rent has also gone up in the United States, and if the housing market stays hot, well, those Americans still have to live somewhere. So if it doesn't make sense to get a new housing payment or to rent, Americans still aren't going to sell. And of course, as inflation rises, that is really unpredictable. That's going to cut into everyone's budgets, and buyers are not going to have enough money to save up for a house, and current homeowners are going to have to pay more for other things, so they're not going to have as much to pay off their house. Those two things are huge issues for the majority of Americans right now, and what this is ultimately leading to is a cool off in the long term for the housing market. I don't think we're going to see an outright crash, and I don't even think we're going to see a correction. More than likely, we're going to see the housing market just stop growing in massive value. What that means is we're not going to see prices grow exponentially larger in 2023 and beyond. They're most likely going to continue to go up, but wages in the United States are most likely going to rise too, so incomes are going to go up, and so are housing values. That is what's traditionally supposed to happen. That way Americans can afford houses again. Demand is going to slowly start to come down, and inventory is going to come up, so then you'll have an equilibrium in the market. That will mean that interest rates will cool off and probably stay right where they're at, or will slightly go back down so more Americans can enter the market, and that will bring home values back up again, but not at a crazy rate. We're only expecting maybe a 2 to 5% raise in values, which is way lower than the 15 to 25% they've gone up every year since 2020. The other thing I want to mention about the housing market too is this great migration of people. So when the pandemic started all the way back in March of 2020, we had millions of Americans living in cities, but that didn't really make much sense. For one, it was way easier to contract the virus, perpetuating the pandemic. Many Americans wanted to get out of cities for that reason, but also many Americans were out of work, and the ones that stayed at work or got new jobs most likely were working from home now. But it's really hard to create a workspace in your one-bedroom studio apartment in New York City. So a lot of Americans went to the suburbs. They bought houses, and they have a huge income because they make a lot of money in cities. So now they're taking that income and moving it into suburbs. Suburbs have boomed in result of that. But now the pandemic is starting to slowly disappear in the United States, and many Americans want that city life again. They're going back and living in cities, so they're putting up a lot of homes. If Americans start putting up a lot of homes in mass though, then this could totally tip and flip the housing market because demand is coming down and inventory is rising, meaning to fill that void, prices have to come way back down. Like I said though, this would have to happen in mass, so Americans are going to have to really move out in large quantities for us to see a big flip like that. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we will see a good portion of Americans eventually leave their houses, but it's not going to be enough to really bring down housing values in 2022. However, inflation is a big problem, and the Federal Reserve raising interest rates has been a big problem for the stock market, and it should probably be a big problem for the housing market too. The reason being is because as the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, fewer people are going to be able to buy homes, and what that's going to lead to is millions of Americans exiting the housing market. If the Federal Reserve makes a big mistake with their policy because they get too aggressive with bringing down inflation and bringing down demand, that could mean way too many people exit the housing market all at once, and then you have a complete flip and reversal with way too many homes on the market and not enough buyers. Then you're going to start to see a situation like we saw in 2008 where there's just so many houses available and banks and people are trying to give them away. But the situation that we're in right now is very different than what we saw in 2008. In 2008, many Americans simply couldn't afford their home in the first place. They didn't have to prove to a bank they had income or assets or any means to pay off that loan. In 2022, it is very different, and it was the same way in 2020 when I bought my first home. I had to go through so many pieces of paperwork in order to prove to the bank that I could pay off this loan. So the majority of Americans can afford their homes, or at least they could upon signing. Like I said, taxes and inflation are going to eat into that a lot, so it wouldn't surprise me if foreclosures end up going up in the United States. The big question though, is the housing market in a bubble, and are we going to see it burst this year or in the future? Well, to say the housing market is in a bubble means literally it needs to burst at some point, and I just don't think that's going to happen. There is a lot of craziness happening in the housing market right now, and I think that things are definitely going to cool off in the future, but we're not going to see an outright crash or a correction. Incomes are definitely going to go up, and as they go up, housing prices are going to cool off, and that's going to reach an equilibrium. Over the next couple of years, demand is going to exit the housing market. It has no other choice to, because houses are just way too unaffordable. So that gives inventory enough time to catch up, so then eventually they're going to reach an equilibrium. That's going to take some time though. As long as the Federal Reserve doesn't make a huge mistake with its interest rates, then there's still going to be enough buyers and enough corporations and real estate investment firms buying houses in the United States to further perpetuate the price spikes that we've seen. There's still going to be Americans and corporations that are able to afford a home, but at some point it just doesn't make any sense to if interest rates are too crazy. And typically in the short term, the spring and summer months are really popular for the housing market. We see home values go way up because it's just way easier to buy and sell a house during the summer. So I expect inventory in the short term to go up, and I also expect prices to go up. But by the end of the summer, we're going to see housing prices start to come down, or at least flatten out. But like I said, the two things that could crash the housing market right now are interest rates and taxes going up for Americans that currently own a home, and also inflation keeping many Americans out of the housing market in general. And then of course, way too many Americans selling their homes because they want to get back to the city, or they want to move around for a brand new job. If those two things happen at an accelerated rate, well, we're going to see a crash in the housing market. There's going to be way too much inventory and not enough buyers. Eventually though, if that was to happen, that will settle itself out too, because the Federal Reserve will then again lower interest rates, bringing so many buyers back into the market and making everything equal once again. But I don't anticipate that happening anytime soon. But now I want to hear from you on this issue. What do you think about the housing market crashing in 2022? Do you think that inflation rising and taxes going up is enough to tank the housing market? Or do you think the housing market is going to stay red hot, or at least just level out this year? Whatever your thoughts are, leave a comment below before you go. But that is it for today's business and financial news breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date with all of the top business and financial news from around the country, our team puts together a free daily newsletter, and you can subscribe to it by clicking the link in this corner right here. And if you want to stay up to date with me and everything else happening in the business and financial world, I'm putting out updates 7 days a week over here on this channel, and I've actually got another one ready for you right here, so be sure to check that out before you go. That is it for me, everybody. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.